Hello, welcome to the Portland, Maine Board of Education meeting of the Finance, Operations, and Personnel Committee on November 18th, 2024, and we are starting at 6:01 p.m. My name is Sarah Bryden. I'm the chair of the committee. With us tonight, we have Board Member Opperman and Board Member Knorr, both are members of the committee. We also have Dr. Ryan Scown, Superintendent of the district. We have Helene DiBartolomeo, the Senior Executive Director of Finance Operations. We have Jennifer Slabank, Executive Director of Human Resources. We have Sarah Warren, Senior Executive Director of Strategy. I think I've hit everybody. Okay, so we are, for anybody who has been following along in previous meetings where we talked about the plan for the course of the year and our committee meetings and what we're going to be talking about, you may have seen that on today's planned agenda was a discussion of equity hiring initiatives. We're going to move that to a different meeting, and we are going to be focusing on the 2026 budget. Hooray! So just a small shift in the topics for today. So we're going to be talking about, we're going to see a review from staff of year-to-date financials. We are going to have a conversation about 2026 budget prep. So things like looking at the budget calendar, investments that that the district could make adjustments to previously discussed numbers, keeping in mind that, you know, budgets are always sort of predictive documents that are subject to change. There are so many factors that go into the changing financials of the district. The teacher contract is about to kick off renegotiation, things like that. And the sort of towards the tail end of the meeting, we're going to be talking about what committee members want to get from staff in terms of information. For example, if each committee member feels strongly about wanting to get more information about a particular topic area for the purposes of, being able to make decisions about the budget, we can talk about what those things might be. I am right now going to check and see if we have participants that might want to give public comment before we really jump into the agenda items and topics that I just listed out. If anybody who is an attendee in this meeting wants to give public comment, you can certainly raise your hand in Zoom. And if there are any attendees who raise their hand to give public comment, I will go over the public comment guidelines. So I'll just give it a beat and see if anybody raises a hand. I am not seeing anybody who would like to give public comment, but I do see that Board Member Figdor, who is a member of the committee, has joined us. So welcome, Board Member Figdor. And let's see, so no public comment. I'm closing public comment. And we are going to move into our agenda. So the first topic is the review of year-to-date financials. So I will turn it over to Senior Executive Director DiBartolomeo.
Good evening. So just really quick, before we get into too much into the details, I just wanted to go ahead and give the committee an update in regards to the finance department. I just wanted to let everyone know at this point, we were dealing with the ESSER 3 federal funds that we received, and we're in the final stages of getting those reimbursements from the state. Those are the drop dead date for the state is December 31st. So we're feeling very confident about meeting that deadline. The other item I wanted to bring forward is that the city auditors will be here on site the week of December 2nd through the 6th. They will be working and reviewing our work papers for our FY24 fiscal year. And I just wanted to also give a brief update on where we are as far as vacancies. I know in the past that the committee, was always looking to see where we were as far as how we were doing with our finance department. So currently, the only two positions I have open is our purchasing manager and our payroll manager at this time. And the last thing I wanted to also bring to your attention is during the Maine PERS information sessions that Superintendent Scallon had been providing, we had 3 buckets of reporting that we had to work on. Well, one of those buckets was our January 2024 to current. That would be all of our reporting that had to do with ADP once we entered the ADP system. I just wanted to go ahead and give you a heads up that we are currently underway on the reporting, beginning stages of our reporting for the teachers plan. And I am finiting the report for our PLD plan, which would be this week. And then we'll be beginning to do that reporting as well for the Maine PERS for both our non-teachers and teachers program. So I just wanted to go ahead and give that update to you all. So let's go ahead and kick into our financials. In front of you, I provided you October through October, which is our 4 months into the school year. What I try to provide you is what was originally adopted, what we reviewed last month when we looked at what we were adding on to our budget, which is the revised budget, plus any add-ons we're doing for this last October month that we had to include. And now that the city has rolled the books in our financial system, I was able to give you that information and compare it to our actuals year to date and also our year to date for the last 3 years. This kind of helps give us some show whether or not we're in line or out of line from previous years and kind of give some idea of where we are. Some of the things I wanted to point out is being 4 months into the fiscal year, we should be at about 33% either utilization or collection rate. So as you can see for our general fund, we are at the 33%. Now, I will preface with some of the other funds, they're on a reimbursement basis. So we collect revenues. There's 3 ways our school district collects revenues. We collect revenues through direct deposit from the state. We collect revenue by invoicing for our reimbursement, either from the state or from private grants, or from private grants providing us the cash receipt of those grant monies up front. And then the third way is through a journal entry through the city, which is when they provide us what that revenue collection from the taxes are. They do it through a journal entry. So those are the 3 ways we collect our fund, or how we would record our revenues. So we are a little behind on some of the grants, but that is, if you could look at the previous year, what we're doing is we're doing a catch up. In essence, when we look at the next page, you'll see that in the expense line, we have a higher bit of expenses to revenue collection for our FY24 year. So we're on like a rolling basis from those funds as well as collecting for this year's funds. Some other things I wanted to bring to your attention is that we are actually increasing the revenue budget for the Bar Foundation grant that we just recently received. So that was a 3-year grant that we were awarded. The first year is $195,000 grant. And then the second grant that we also received was a $25,000 private grant. This was for library books for 3 of the middle schools. And so as you can see there, we're increasing both our revenues for our private grants by $220,000 to show that increase for that grant money.
Eileen, is now an okay time for a question?
Sure.
Super. I just, first of all, I want to acknowledge all of the hard work that goes into preparing this information and express my gratitude for it. So thank you for taking the time to put this together for us. My question is, I'm curious about whether Medicare reimbursement would be part of the other line item towards the bottom. Is that why it's 400,000 something?
No, so actually our main care reimbursement would be in our general fund revenue line. That's
Oh,
part
okay.
of that revenue collection in there. And
Okay.
actually, right now, we're at, year to date, we've collected $73,000.
Okay.
So we're about a 24% collection rate, which is slightly under the 33 where we're expecting to be. But it's actually very exciting news because, when we get reimbursement, when we're on a reimbursement basis, it's a little bit slower because obviously the month has to end, then the information needs to be put together, and then we
Mhm.
have to wait for the state to approve the reimbursement for us. So being at 24%, I'm really excited to hear that 4 months in, we're already basically at what we would expect for a 3-month collection. I didn't mean to point that out, and I apologize for that.
No, no need to apologize. So as a follow-up question, what sorts of things would be in that other year-to-date actual, that relatively large number? What sort of thing would go into that other bucket?
So we have grants that don't really fit into the private piece or into the federal piece. So I kind of put that in a other. If you
Okay.
want, I can get you more information on it for the next meeting, and we can go into a little bit more detail on like what's in the private grant and what's in the other grant. If you
Okay. Sure.
and
Yeah. I wouldn't, I mean, I don't think it's the type of um, question or additional information that requires a lot of effort. I'm not saying like go and like, hunt down every scrap of information about it. I just saw a relatively large number on the screen and wanted to better understand what goes into it.
Yeah, and like I said, so if you notice that there's not even a budget line associated with it, a lot of that is probably grants from last year, us collecting that revenue that we didn't get reimbursement for last year that we spent the money on that we're collecting this year. But
Okay.
I can get you more detail on that.
Thank you.
The other thing I wanted to point out when I looked at where we were with our revenue collection from last year and compared it to this year, I noticed that we're $4.5 million higher than we were last year on our collection of revenues. And we're looking at all funds. So we're pretty much comparing apples to apples when I'm giving you that number of what the total is. It's just to me that speaks volumes on what we're doing as far as getting that collection on a more timely basis.
Super. Thank you so much.
Ryan, can you move to the expenses? So here's the other side where we're looking now at our expenses. Again, I provided you our adopted versus what we revised the budget from the September. And then as you can see, we added about $393,000 in additional budget amendments for expenses. Again, a lot of those budgets had to do with those rolling forward, those private grants that we didn't finalize in last year. So we're bringing over the remaining budget that was not spent yet. Also, you'll see that we have the $195,000 for the bar grant and the $25,000 for the library books in there. Overall, our general fund expenses are at 29% utilization, where we were expecting if we're looking 4 months into the year, we should, we want to be no more than 33% if we were trying to compare month to month. And then last year, I took a look at where we were last year. We were exactly at 29% as well. So relative to last year and this year, we're pretty on target as far as our spending in the general fund. The other piece that I wanted to bring out with forward is that in the general fund, when I looked at the utilization, when I broke it down by school versus schools, the schools are averaging about 26% utilization, with our on the low end average, the low end utilization being 19%, and then on the high end being 31%. So again, no one is overspending in any of the categories when it comes to the general fund. So I just wanted to bring this slide forward. This is just breaking it down into a little bit more detail of our expenses within the general fund. Since general fund is our biggest portion of where our operating funds come from and what we pay our employees out of. As you can see, our personnel and benefits were at a 28% utilization rate. Contracted services is right at the 33% mark. Some of the places where I see the reasons that is happening is, we pay, I noticed that in the IT department, we have the E-rate that we have to pay for our networking. That was paid all upfront at the beginning of the year. Our district software and annual subscriptions, those are all a one-time fee, not necessarily something we pay on a monthly basis. So that would bring our costs up. And some of the other contracted services that are kind of driving us right to the mark would be our contracted services that we're doing through our finance department, and that would be our ADP costs, our Barry Dunn costs, and our Robert Half costs. So, and then again, as we spoke before, our supplies are a bit high, not high, but, just at the mark now. Before last month, if you remember, our supplies were a little bit above the 25% mark. But now that you see that we're kind of leveling off and going with the flow now that we're into the school year. Our debt service is on the high side, and that's with debt service, bonds are paid twice a year. So you're only going to see that, they go in once and then go in another time. So there's really no smoothing out of costs across the months for debt service. And as you can see, comparing where we are this year to last year, I know it looks like we're higher, but again, costs went up, and but we're relatively at the same rate of spending that we were last year. We're at 29% currently, and we're 29% last year this time as well. So that's all I had for financials. I'm not sure if anybody had any more specific questions in regards to the finances.
Board Member Opperman, go ahead.
Hi. Really very, very good presentation in detail. The one thing I thought of, and the one line you had was we're on 2024 PERS in ADP. How's that going from ADP to PERS? I was just concerned.
Yeah, no, that's in the beginning update. So we were able to get that report finalized for the teachers, and we actually submitted our first file to Maine PERS with using the ADP reporting. And so we're just trying to clean up some information, and then it'll be 1 month after another. Once we get the clear on each month, we'll be able to start moving it forward, quickly as we do the cleanup. Just, minor kind of just tweaks and adjustments that need to be made. What happens is when you upload the information into the system, it spits out to you things that don't seem to really match. And so there are some small adjustments that we need to make on our end in the system. We went all the way from January, which was the prior fiscal year, into this year. So a lot of changes have occurred for a lot of our employees from one year to the other. So it's just doing some little housekeeping to get those reports to match up.
Okay, thank you.
I am not seeing other questions, and I don't have any at this time. So again, thank you so much. I'll reiterate what I said and what Board Member Opperman said about the value of this information. So I appreciate the effort it took to put it together.
Thank you.
Okay, next up on the agenda, we're going to talk about the 2026 budget. as I have said in many a meeting, it's always budget season, but then there's also the actual time of year where we get into a lot of budget conversations specifically, and we are headed into that time of year. And so from the context of wanting to be prepared and do this in a very, very thoughtful and methodical way, let's turn now to the fiscal year 26 budget. Superintendent Scallon, were you intending to drive this part of the conversation?
Yeah, Helene and I are actually going to share it.
Okay.
So I'm going to do the first little bit. I'll do the less technical pieces, and then she'll come in behind me with the technical pieces, if that works. And as you said in the framing, I think what we're trying to do here is give you the early preview of some initial thinking, while recognizing that it is both really too early to say that this is set in stone. And as we'll say in our presentation, there's a lot of things that can happen between now and June when voters go and approve the budget. And so we want to recognize that. And so this is far from saying here is a proposal, but we also want to share with you some thinking so that we can capture some of yours, and to make sure that we're getting that feedback as we prepare for the superintendent budget in March, so that we're capturing the committee's input. We also shared a lot of this input and a lot of this information with our principals and our department heads today. And so we have a process where we're capturing their feedback over the next 3 months. And so we wanted to make sure that we had your feedback, their feedback, as well as the community feedback in this process. And so we felt like it was an opportune time to engage in that conversation. First, overall, we just want to recognize that the budget changes we made in preparation for this year, what was difficult, many of the changes that were made are having a positive impact, and that we're looking to make incremental improvements in FY26. So we're not expecting the same level of changes or being needed. What you see below are some of the FY 2025 investments and adjustments that were aligned to initiatives in this year's strategic plan. So I'm just going to call out a couple of them. So special education coordinators in schools. So there was an intentional shift to putting more special education capacity from the central office into the schools, and schools are reporting that this capacity has been helpful. And while it's too early, initial findings are that we're seeing that it's helping with relationships with families, better reporting and engagement around IEPs meetings, and maybe even helping a little bit with some of the cases that go to due process. And so early pieces seem to be that it's helping. School culture coordinators, which aligns with our work around building culture and joy within schools, is that we are seeing in the early years some initial improvement in attendance. And while again, too early to measure suspension data, data in October is promising. And we've gotten anecdotal feedback from families about feeling like this has been a huge improvement, and from principals feeling like it's allowing them to focus on other pieces. Mental health supports, you may remember that we did do an investment in social workers in a number of our schools, and that we are seeing that there's some additional benefit there in terms of their caseload and having the ability to do both proactive and reactive supports. The fourth bullet here around additional planning time, there was an investment to make sure that all of our schools were able to offer 5 planning periods for teachers, and that also meant that elementary school students got 5 enrichment periods. And so that's been great for students. It sometimes has been challenging because of limited subs has also meant in some cases higher staff absences. And then we did do a shift in terms of structure and moving to network teams, and are getting positive feedback. Still in the early stages, but around the network teams being able to provide timely and data-driven supports that are really focused around implementation and acting on the data. And you've seen some of that within the monthly feedback or the monthly presentations that our assistant soups have done at the board meetings.
Yep. Yep. Superintendent Scanlon, this is, thank you for this slide. Is now a good time for a question?
I'd love to push through sort of like the first couple and just sort
Sure.
of give framing on it.
Yeah, Board Member Figdor, I see you. So yes, so Dr. Scanlon, if you could continue and then just let us know when a pause point makes sense. Thanks.
Yep, happy to do that. In terms of our budget process as we move forward, that slide just felt like it got really big. As we move forward, just wanted to share with you what is a early draft of the official calendar for budget. So we have just coming up before we get to the formal budget process, we have 2 more Finance Committee meetings. In December and January, we have the public forum on our FY26 budget on February 4th, and then a school finance committee meeting right after that on February 10th. And then as you can see there, actually, I think that should be March 4th on the superintendent's budget presentation, so I'm sorry about that. And then you can see on March 10th and 17th, we're estimating that we would have school finance committee meetings. And then we'd get to public hearings and a final vote on the school board on April 8th. And city council around May 19th, approximately, going off of last year's calendar, and June 10th public referendum. Just want to note here that in all of these cases, actually including the public forum, every place where you see a school finance committee meeting or a public forum, public comment is available. And so we have all these times within our formal process that community engagement is welcome and really strongly encouraged. And we would welcome folks to participate in that. And we also have a number of buckets that are in slightly less formal structures, highlighted in the top part of this slide. So this fall, we had community sessions, continuing our Listen and Learn series with the superintendent, and the board has had, and still has, I think, 2 more left, community sessions of their own with Listen and Learn. This spring, you will see coming up on our website in the not too distant future, community sessions with the board and superintendent that are particularly focused on the budget, and my own intention to join the PTO meetings to be able to get feedback there. And so just want to name that, and we're not sharing here tonight because we did it with our principals and our department heads earlier today. We went through calendars with them that had engagement for both departments and for principals and APs, as well as a listening session that we plan to do in partnership with our unions at all of the schools to get staff input as well. And so last year, just being really transparent, the budget process snuck up on us a little bit, and just the scale of change that was needed. And so this year, feeling a little bit more on the front foot in terms of really engaging staff and school leaders in particular earlier on in the process to have their feedback fully in it. As we're going through this budget process, we just want to remember that we're going to continue to work to align the budget with our strategic plan and build on the successes we've had in year 1 doing that as we plan for year 2. I just want to preview for this committee so that you guys have sort of in the front of your mind the work that is coming up in this strategic plan. And part of what we may ask you to do is help us prioritize a little bit of this. As you will see in the next 3 slides, it is a lot. And so we may choose as a district and as a board to move a couple of things from year 2 to year 3 as we look at this. And so first, what you see here is initiatives that are moving into the launch phase or are continuing in the launch phase. All of these initiatives are initiatives that are ongoing this year. And so you'll recognize them. In fact, you will get an update on the status of each of them tomorrow in the board meeting. But there are 10 initiatives, I believe, here, and they are all in launch phase next year. And so ongoing and deepening work. Here's where it becomes sort of even more is we have a number of initiatives that move into the pilot phase next year. And so this year we've been focused on just reading instruction in the K-6 space. Next year, we're starting to look at our math instruction. We're digging in around multilingual learners, staff recruitment and onboarding, and then how do we engage families through two-way communication? And so having more ways to effectively engage parents. Right now, a lot of our communication strategies that we've been working on have been one-way. And so a little bit more about how do we do two-way communication. And then there's a lot of initiatives, and this is where we want to talk about a little bit of prioritization, a lot of initiatives that go into design phase next year. And they range from continuing to expand opportunities for underserved students and families, particularly through some of our partnerships, adult education, digging into our curriculum work at the high school level. I highlight here high school design simply because that's one that continues, right? So that is not a new one next year. Mental health supports, our work around community schools, and then coaching and feedback for staff, deepening our standard operating procedures work that we've started this year, and then around transportation. And so there's a ton of work that's going on here. This past year, we had 9 initiatives or 10 initiatives in work that we were balancing. And this coming year, it more than doubles. And so we really want to think about what does that mean from a capacity end and what does that mean from a budget end in terms of need. And with that, we're in the early planning process to think about what is needed and can forecast some initial anticipation in terms of strategic investments and potential increased costs. And so what you can see here below is where we're identifying some potential increased investments, and the aligned initiative is in parentheses. So for special education, staffing has been a challenge all year, and we anticipate that staffing will continue to be a challenge. And we're engaging in work this year with the district management group to think about our overall continuum of supports for students in special education. And so we do anticipate that we will be in our budget and talking to the board about both increasing staffing for doing pipeline development work and ways to engage and increase the number of special education staff that we're able to recruit and effectively retain and develop. And that we will need to be opening and developing more programs that will be in-house as the number of seats that exist out of district for students is becoming more limited. The second area of anticipated investment is around community schools, which is a larger initiative that focuses around everything from out of school time, so after school to summer school. And so thinking about how do we both staff that work. This is an area where actually Dr. Opterman speaks about this a fair amount in terms of thinking about how do we accelerate learning for students, and how do we do that by taking advantage of these pieces around tutoring after school and summer enrichment, and how do we effectively leverage that. And so really thinking about how do we use community schools to do that, as well as further support mental health, community health in this work. The third is that as we continue our work around high quality instructional materials and going deeper around our academic programs, we not only need to support and maintain the materials of programs we've invested in, but also look at new programs. And so we have the materials that we've purchased, but we'll need to maintain around EL, our English curriculum, and CKLA. And we're looking at purchasing social emotional learning, or SEL, curriculum for students. Schools are at varying spots in that. And there's an open question about what the math program will be. It's very possible that it will be a continuation of what we have, right? So I don't want to preview anything there. There's no preview there that next year really is an exploration of this, but it's potential that we will need materials there. The fourth is just an increased cost that we know of, which is a continuation of the Barry Dunn contract around Maine PERS. And And then what I shared with the principals is that we are working with the principals about programming adjustments at their individual school level, where they're looking at what does our data say, what does our student need say, and what do we need to do in terms of adjustments. But we're not thinking about across the board, district-wide changes in the same way that we had this year. And so I put that there to be in full transparency about those conversations, but that there's not the same type of like wholesale change that there was this past year. There's also factors that may, and we know in some cases will develop over the next 3 to 7 months that could and will impact our budget that we have varying levels of control over. So the first is, as you shared at the beginning of this meeting, Chair, we are in the opening phases of our teacher contract negotiations. And we know that we will be increasing how much we pay our teachers to make sure, one, that we're competitive and recognizing their contribution to the district, and that we know that that will impact our budget overall. When we do our 5-year models for our budget, we don't include non-settled contracts in there. We don't put a marker in there. We leave that open. And so we know that that will increase our overall anticipated budget. The second area is that the state is currently reviewing its EPS funding formula, and this could have potentially positive or negative impacts. And we will not know that until later on in this process. And the election at the federal level will potentially have impacts on both the Department of Education as well as title funding and other funds that go through at the federal level. And so we will need to continue to monitor how that funding passes through the state from the federal level. And so that will impact us. Third area, benefits. Again, this is one that if you're new to this process, this is a late developing piece in our budget where we usually find out in late March or early April exactly what our final benefit costs are. And so we know that this will impact our budget. We will have to estimate and then adjust final costs at the end. We're looking to get from you tonight, and we have new board members that are joining. And so there may be some adjustments that happen to the strategic plan. And as staff look at how we can balance the number of priorities there. And so they may also require some adjustments. And then last is, as we all will know, there's always the surprise, the thing that's unanticipated that we need to be able to be flexible and adjust for. And so we need to be fluid in this process as we go forward. And so know that this is an ongoing conversation that we'll need to be flexible on. With that, I'm going to pass it to Helene, who's going to do a couple of slides, and then we'll open it up to questions. Helene's going to share a little bit about how we've already started to plan for some of this, including the use of fund balance, how we've made assumptions in our 5-year plan, and how we're going to think about adjusting those, and then lead us into a couple of the prompts that we had talked about, Chair, as well as answer any questions.
Oh, Helene, you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So
No
if
worries.
you remember last year, when we put the budget book together, one of the items that we included in there is what we thought or anticipated what we were looking at based on our strategic priorities of how to use our fund balance for the next 5 years as well. So I just wanted to bring that forward and show you where we had made that alignment and provided how we were planning to spend the fund balance for the 26 year. As you can see, we were doing the second payment for the pension obligation, prioritizing equity with some adult ed consulting work, and our achievement with some math design and high school curriculum, and our community school additional 50,000. And then some leadership training for our priority 4 for our people, And as you saw earlier, where we had some priorities around transportation in the systems area of another 50,000. And again, this was fluid and what at the time, what we thought might be what was anticipated. And of course, that's why we're here today to see if these, what changes we would like to see or if any addition to it as well. So the second piece of our 5-year or our budget book that we provided last year is of a 5-year overall plan. And so I just wanted to go over some of the assumptions that we originally made in that 5-year plan in order to get to year 2. When we were looking at revenues, and this is one of the reasons we want to go through this, because at the time it seemed reasonable to anticipate some of these assumptions. But now, Ryan and I took a step back, and knowing where we are and what we've been through, we're realizing there's going to be obviously some major adjustments, or not major, but there's going to be quite a few adjustments made. For instance, first bullet under revenues, 2% increase in title funding. We saw that when we anticipated that for FY25, we expected an increase in our title funding, and that didn't actually come to fruition. So we're going to have to go back and review that our assumption on revenue assumptions, as well as with some of our the state share, as well as the CDS. We were last year anticipating a change in the reimbursement program for the SPED pre-K program. That's the CDS piece, our Child Development Services. So we're still waiting for what that looks like. The 3% was an expectation that if our costs went up, then our revenue, obviously our reimbursement would go up. So that's where that assumption came from. Again, the hardship, we're not quite sure where we are with getting our hardship funding and where we will be, if that's 10% a little aggressive or not. And then, I know last year we talked about the Medicaid reimbursement model and where we were going to be. And so, I gave you the report where we are today. And as we get closer to the end of the year, we can see if we can get more confidence level on whether or not a 20% increased reimbursement for next year is a reasonable assumption to increase that revenue stream next year. On the expenditure side, when I did the 5-year plan, I made some assumptions in regards to benefits, contracted services, and utilities of 2.5%. Our benefits, I believe our health insurance came in at around 5%. So we're not sure where that's going to happen, as you heard earlier. And then when we're looking at our capital equipment and our general supplies, that's just going to be all based on, where overall how the economy is doing in regards to, is a 3% increase over, this current year going to be enough or not? And then a 3.5% increase on salary and wages, that was based on trying to average out what we were anticipating for contracts for next year. Again, we'll have to take a look at that and see how that actually fell with not only the contracts for ed techs that we have, but, the upcoming teachers contract, if that's going to be, solidified by, or have a good idea of where we're going to be by that time when we're working on the budget. So a lot of moving parts, a lot of things to think about just when we're looking at not doing anything other than looking at what we're currently working with and how do we move forward with that. So knowing that, thank you. So knowing that last year we provided you a budget book, I believe Ryan and I took a stab at trying to provide as much information as we could that could help provide more insight to what, was previously provided. As a reminder, in the past, the there was the only funding sources that were provided were for the general fund, food service, and adult ed. And those are the three required ones for the state. We added in the federal and the private grants that to show you how we were planning to allocate our funding for any other positions that were going to be funded through that process. We provided the 5-year projection plan. We provided a 5-year fund balance plan. And then also what we provided this past year was an itemized list of expenses by department of the non-personnel budgets. We had this department start out with a zero-based budget, and I had them provide us detail of exactly what they were planning to use their budgets for. We provided a comprehensive school staffing comparison. And the last thing we did was by school and department, provided you a detailed budget of every individual school and department, including how we were using those federal funds for those schools. So at this point, we wanted to stop here, I guess, and first take a look at knowing what we put in the budget book, and wanted to know if there was anything you felt that was helpful that you wanted more detail on, or anything you wanted us to see if there's a potential to add to the budget book to provide some more transparency and clarity on how we got to some numbers that we did.
Yeah, thank you. So before I open it up for questions, I just want to quickly note, this document is not on board docs yet. So if that could be made available on board docs, that'd be super. And Board Member Figdor, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Actually, it is on board docs.
I did find it on board docs as well.
Oh, I went in about 10 minutes ago and I didn't see it. So, okay.
Thank you. I had a few, I can answer this question, and then when it's appropriate, I had some questions on the previous slide. I've been a broken record on this, but I do not think you can release the FY26 superintendent budget without including a full and complete list of the positions that are the superintendent is proposing to add and that the superintendent is proposing to cut. Last year, the board could not understand the budget when it was released because we didn't have that information. And I think we went for a really detailed level of, those spreadsheets, the Excel spreadsheets, which were excellent and extremely helpful. But weren't ready for prime time, which is why my understanding of why we didn't get them until about a week after the budget was released. So if that's not possible, we need just a much more 30,000-foot level list of the positions that are being proposed to cut and that are being added. Otherwise, it's really hard to understand the budget. And I would also propose that really encourage you to include data that's going to help the board understand the trends over time, the changes over time. So again, I really very strongly encourage you to include a list of the positions that are being proposed and are being to be added and to be cut.
And Board Member Figdor, just to make sure I understand your comment, thank you for your comment. I want to make sure I'm understanding. You're not suggesting that information should have been included in the slides we just saw, correct?
No. No. We're way premature for that. But just
that's why that's why I'm clarifying. Yeah.
When we get to the March, I don't remember the precise date. The date when the superintendent unveils his budget. Mm-hmm. On that date, the board needs to understand what's being proposed, and it can't be these are some of the positions we're adding and these are some of the positions we're cutting, but it has to be so the board knows right up front what is being proposed to be added and to be cut in terms of positions.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. And it sounded like you had another question as well.
I have questions on the previous slides, but I can.
No, go for it.
One thing that I was wondering, I expected to see and didn't, and so I'm curious as to why not, is anything with respect in terms of the potential changes in the FY26 budget that we're anticipating, is anything about the Boundaries Committee, the recommendations, and specifically around the middle school model, which I think offers an opportunity to find reductions that we can make while strengthening our delivery system.
So the boundary committee work it's still ongoing. I think it's too early to even forecast in this slide potential changes on it. So that's the only reason I left it off, is because it's potential. I think it's an open question. The timeline was always really aggressive to get a full report and potential action that would impact February, by February, that would impact the fiscal year 26 budget. And so I think that's an open question still about that committee being in a spot where we would have a full actionable report that would impact fiscal year 26. And so that's the reason.
Okay. Other questions, generally in terms of the content that we just saw, or specifically in terms of information that committee members would like to see added, levels of detail to the budget book information. Board Member Opperman, go ahead.
Yes, I have one question. Just to refresh my mind, what is the district management group? I know I've probably heard this before, but I don't remember.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to start a piece of that, and then Dr. Warren can add to it. So we have an initiative right now, 2.5, that is around our special education programming, and particularly looking at the full continuum of supports that we have for students. We identified that that was an initiative that was at risk for being completed on time and at the level that we wanted this year. And we also know that it is probably one of our most significant priorities as a district because of its impact that it has across the board. And so recognizing that we needed capacity because of staffing challenges within that area, we engaged an outside group, district management group, to provide additional capacity through a consulting contract. And so Sarah can share with you exactly what they're working with us on.
Hi there. Yes, so District Management Group is a Boston-based firm. We have really just started working with them, but now we're moving at pretty rapid speed. They have multiple responsibilities as part of this partnership. So one is taking data that we provide them and doing some analysis of our current situation with regard to special education. They will be doing a number of focus groups and individual interviews with folks across the district, both at the school level, the district level, and then engaging with our families as well, to learn just about people's experience with our special education approach and what's working, what's not, and where people would like to see this go. One of the advantages of working with them is that they bring broad national experience and a depth of experience, particularly around special education, program design, scheduling, staffing, et cetera. So they'll be able to help bring research and best practice to us from other districts and enable us to benchmark our own work against where other folks are in the education sector at this point. They will also be helping us go through a scheduling exercise. So they have a sort of methodology worked out where we can gather information from school-based staff and others, actually district-based staff as well, to learn how people are using time in support of special education programming. And they will feed that into the analysis. And ultimately, we will receive, and develop together with them with an advisory group that we're launching this week, which I'm hoping you're going to join, Dr. Opperman. And we'll be working together with them to develop a set of recommendations that we can then bring forward to the board. And it will be how we develop our budget request for the next year as well. It will guide that process.
Board Member Figdor, go ahead.
Thank you. Dr. Warren, I'm wondering if that work, which sounds incredibly useful and like there's a lot of expertise that will be brought to the table that could be helpful to us. I'm wondering if that's going to be informed by internal work we did in 2022 at the staff level to review our continuum of care and consider changes to the way that we provide special education services. I know the work in 2022 was quite extensive at the staff level.
Yeah, so Jessie Applegate, our Director of Special Education, is centrally involved in leading this process together with myself and District Management Group. And so he's bringing that historical process and those findings and information to bear.
Thank you. And then I had a second question with respect to the Community Schools Initiative, and I know we haven't delved that far into it as a board. I think the community school model has tremendous potential, and I was able to, I'm part of the Local Progress organization and on their school board steering committee, which is a group of national a group that brings together school board members all across the country to work on issues to improve education. And I went to their national meeting a couple of years ago and was able to visit as part of that a community school that was a different I would say it was just incredibly impressive, the range of service, the entire way that this school thought about serving children and meeting students' needs. And it was very different than what I would see some of our community schools like Reiki or Talbot, which have community school in the name. And I know need to meet some criteria as part of that, but do not have, as I saw it, kind of this full-blown continuum, wraparound services and continuum of care for students. And I'm wondering, Mr. Superintendent, because we haven't talked that much about this, is, can you tell us a little bit more about, and I know it's in our strategic plan, but a little bit more about kind of what the initial steps might be, what it might look like for us in Portland. Is it an expansion of what we're already doing at some of our community schools, or is it more of an adherence to kind of this fuller model?
Yeah, so I don't want to minimize what the programming is that happens at Talbot or that happens at Reiki, or even the student-based health centers that are great examples of a piece of that at our high schools, right? So there are small components that I think of as important parts of community schools that exist within the district. But when I think about community schools overall in the model, I think we stop pretty short of what it is. And so when I think of community schools, I think it goes from everything from how do we make sure that students are ready for school when they show up, right? So really thinking about the wraparound services for food insecurity to mental health and access to social work, to academic supports, to enrichment after school. And so it is a sort of like real continuum of services and supports that exist for students in the schools that really evens the playing field and makes sure that everybody has access. And it's really an opportunity, I think, to get students what they need And so even when you think about leveraging community schools for something like after school, so students can both have access to enrichment, right? Clubs, those types of things, but also to really targeted academic support to make sure that before a student even falls behind academically, they're getting that reading intervention that they need right there in the school. And it goes, and continues on during the summer. And so programming's available. But this is a piece that nationally exists. So this is not a made-up model, but nationally exists. I would say that Maine has been a little bit light touch on it. Philadelphia had a big initiative around this, and it was part of Philadelphia's big turnaround work was around community schools. And so it's something I'm very familiar with. In terms of what it means for next year, it wouldn't mean a significant change next year because we're really trying to be thoughtful about how do you go through this idea of design, pilot, launch, and then monitor. And so next year, it would be really thinking about what's the team, how do we look at models? Like you said, how do we go and visit? How do we talk about what are the pillars of community schools? And then how do we think about bringing this to scale in a way that we could sustain? And one piece of that is that in Portland, I've had a lot of conversations with community partners that are really interested in the work that we do in schools and sometimes have a hard time figuring out what their toehold and what their handhold is in our schools. And so we need to think about how within this community school work, we're doing that engagement because we also can't think about how do we afford to do all of that ourselves. And so we can't just jump into this. But we really have to think about how do we do the design work next year.
Thank you. That's great to hear. I think it has a lot of promise for us, and I hope as part of that work, and I certainly understand the timeline. I hope as part of that work, the board is able to go and visit more a community schools that are kind of this fuller model to really understand what it can look like, because I think it's in what I saw. I was in St. Louis, was incredibly powerful, and it was surprising to me because I had been on the board for several years, and I didn't understand that all that the community school model, the potential it holds for students. So really excited I think it has a lot of promise for us, and excited to see it, and absolutely understand that it would take time to develop and to scale up. Thank you.
Thank you. So specific to the question of what additional information would be useful in the budget book, I think the information that was provided last year was very much appreciated. So one thing that's coming to mind, and I'm not sure, this is not a fully formed thought in terms of please, do exactly this. But one thing that might be helpful from my perspective is to get some sort of indication of the line items that are particularly difficult to predict, or the ones that have a lot of volatility, to better understand where the pockets of uncertainty are real, where those the uncertainty is more pronounced. I'm not expecting anybody to have a crystal ball, but that's one thing that comes to mind in terms of, something that would be helpful. And it could even just be as simple as talking through what those items are versus having an act like a flag or something like that in the budget book. But that's one thing that comes to mind. Are there other questions, comments, or concerns about the content that we just talked through, specifically to sort of gauge and judge whether or not we're ready to move on to a discussion of what committee members are hoping to have more information about from staff as we move further into the budget process? Any other questions, comments, concerns about the content that we've seen? Okay. So the last part of this discussion from the agenda is to sort of go through and see what committee members might want staff to spend a little bit of time researching, so that we all feel comfortable and confident moving into the budget process. To be clear, I'm not looking for 7 things, from each person, 1 or 2 things to sort of set a reasonable amount of research and effort for staff to do. I'll start with an example. And then we can see what else folks might want to get more information about. So my example comes from a couple of budget processes in a row. There's been some discussion of the amount of money that the district spends on the contract for crossing guards. And I know from previous meetings that this year's line item for that particular expense is not increasing. There was a risk that it would increase, and thankfully our wonderful staff was able to keep that relatively static, which is wonderful. But I would be interested in getting a better sense of whether it's possible to handle that function in a different way, both for cost reasons and also from the perspective of, having the person who helps students cross the street safely potentially be somebody who is a part of the school community, and, the opportunity in the mornings and the afternoons to use that activity as an opportunity to continue to build relationships and connection. If the answer from staff is, well, that's naive and there's no way to do it, then that's the answer. But I would appreciate some digging in terms of the feasibility of that. Other areas that committee members would like staff to look into a little bit. Board Member Ackerman, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to ask, Chair, is this the section where we're thinking about what they could look into it as far as investments, and where they could look into for savings and all?
I think both. Yeah, both.
Okay. One thing on the savings part, which is rather critical because we are ambitious in a good way, is developing a really well-developed volunteer corps. Something where, as you're saying, groups of people who become part of a community, school community, who, again, when we say community schools, that's also my mental picture. I don't know if that's what Member Figdor was talking about, but and also connecting the schools and communicating what schools are doing with individuals in the community. I mean, I don't know how much we can pull on it, but since there are more people that don't have kids than there are people who do have kids in the district, and some of them are of a age or means that they could regularly volunteer, that would be a piece. There is a concern that it's taking jobs away. I think that's part of the reason it died away from teachers or from ed techs or whatever, but just a balance there. And that was one thing. One of the other things is an investment. I don't know how expensive an investment is. Make it happen beyond multilingual, but maybe to economically challenged individuals, perhaps not as an SEL thing, but, just again, expanding that kind of, as you read through the great stuff that goes on at the high school from start to finish, and going off to visit schools or, visit careers or whatever in a systematic way. That's something that I think is important. And Member Figdor brought up about middle school, what's the middle school picture going on? One of the things I've been spending so much time, not a lot of time, but some time, at Paths, and looking at the CTE program and how engaging that is, and how expanding the dignity of work type idea, and whether that incorporation of that dignity of work somehow becomes part of a middle school curriculum. That's a pie in the sky thing, I know, but that's just one of those things that I think that would engage and maybe fill in more beyond the academic or social grouping type stuff. And the presentations I've heard about summer school, after school, that whole thing is, when there are large gaps in education, how much learning loss there is. So those are my wish list. We'll see how it goes.
Thank you, Board Member Opperman. Board Member Figdor, go ahead.
Yeah, in 2022 or 2023, we passed a resolution to start a pilot program to require, the board policy was to require all educators gain some kind of credentialing in teaching English language learners. And I think that this work is absolutely critical for our equity goal. And so I know that we've piloted, we started at least to pilot this work. And so figuring out what the next steps are to ensure that all of our teachers are well equipped and have the experience, the cultural humility, the comfort level, the experience, the skills, all of that to be able to teach multilingual learners, I think is really just a critically important part of our equity work. So I would hope to see what the next steps were in that.
Thank you, Board Member Figdor. And Board Member Noor, I want to just make sure to leave space for you to voice anything that you'd like to have staff do some more digging into as we move into the budget. If we've got it covered, then we've got it covered. That's fine. But I wanted to make sure to leave some space for you.
Yes, thank you. I think we've covered a lot. There was something that came up as a question of mine. Maybe this could be something we could review for on one of the slides that we had some of the investments that we made and some of the additions that we made in the last budget and how we benefited. I just want to see if there's any way we can look back at this last budget and see if there's any things we've taken away or added that actually might have not benefited us. So I wanted to look into that.
Super. Thank you. All right. We are at the end of our agenda, and I am going to just leave a moment or two for any remaining comments, questions, concerns, or suggestions from anybody.
No,
All right.
This was really good. It was expansive. It was detailed. It was all those things. And I feel like my brain, I got to work out. I don't know about everybody else, but I got to work out. So, and I appreciate it. And this is your last meeting, Ms. Figdor. Thank you for your questions. They're often very important and excellent. So appreciate that. So that's all I have to say today.
Thank you, Board Member Opperman. Yes, thank you, Board Member Figdor, for all of your the time and energy that you've spent on the board and on this committee specifically. So thank you for that. Let's see. So it is 7:14, and I am going to look for a motion to adjourn. Board Member Figdor and a second from Board Member Opperman. Show of hands. We are adjourned at 7:14 p.m. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your evening, everybody.